As I stood in the almost empty classroom with only 2 other students, I realized that signing up randomly for whichever course was available might not have been my best choice. But, well, I didn't have much of a choice anyway. I scoffed at myself. 6 months, just 6 months of this, and I could switch to something else. My mood lightened at the thought of the pizza waiting for me that night. As I stood there, the door opened and a man walked in. He was well dressed, with long curls cascading to his shoulders and a face so striking it was almost otherworldly. I hadn't seen anyone so beautiful in years. The sight of him stunned me. Without saying a word, he picked up a broken piece of chalk and wrote on the board, "Nice to meet you all. I'm Ron, your sculpting teacher." I blinked, startled. Teacher? For a moment, I thought he was a model or an artist on display himself. The other 2 students seemed unimpressed, sighing heavily, clearly disinterested. After the brief introduction, the class started, but it wasn't what I expected. Instead of working on anything hands-on, Ron played a video about the basics of sculpting and remained silent the entire time. I spent more time looking at him than at the video. After the class, I learned the other 2 students were dropping out. I considered doing the same, but something about the quiet intrigue of the class and Ron made me decide to stay. A part of me felt bad for him, too. If no one else stayed, would he lose the job? The next day, I was the only one in the classroom. It felt oddly intimate, the silence heavier than before. Ron walked up to me and handed me a piece of paper. "Are you sure you want to continue this class?" I smirked, thinking it was a test, but then I realized he couldn't speak. The knowledge hit me harder than it should have, and I immediately felt guilty for smirking. I nodded and said, "Yes," half out of genuine interest, half out of pity. His eyes lingered on mine for a moment before he walked to the front and began the lesson. For weeks, it was just the 2 of us. He communicated only through notes, his instructions simple yet cryptic. My sculptures turned out strange, abstract forms that seemed to emerge from a place I didn't fully understand. They were detailed, almost grotesquely so, with expressions that felt too real. I didn't question it at first. Art is meant to evoke emotion, after all. One night after class, something changed. I lingered, examining the pieces I'd worked on. They felt alive in a way that made my skin crawl. The lights flickered. The room seemed to shift. Shadows danced unnaturally on the walls, and I swore I heard whispers. Then, on the chalkboard, a message appeared, scratched in jagged letters. "Sculpt me." I stumbled back, my tools clattering to the floor. The sculptures around me seemed to move, just slightly, but enough to make my blood run cold. I bolted for the door, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening, until the light snapped off completely. In the darkness, I felt them, cold, stone-like hands brushing against me. The sound of grinding stone filled the air, and then a voice. Ron's voice whispered directly into my mind. "Create me." The lights flickered back on, and everything was normal again. The sculptures were in their original places, and Ron walked in, his usual silent demeanor intact. He handed me another note. "Are you all right? You look pale. We'll end class early today. You don't seem well." I nodded, too shaken to argue. Outside the classroom, I noticed a poster on the notice board. It bore Ron's name and advertised an upcoming sculpting exhibition. Was it the same Ron? The description was vague, but it seemed likely. The next day, I went to the exhibition, curious. The gallery was packed, the crowd buzzing with admiration for the sculptures on display. Each piece was hauntingly lifelike. A man mid-scream, a child crouched in fear, a woman crying bloody tears. The detail was astonishing, almost unsettling. Then I saw him, Ron. He was nothing like the reserved, quiet figure from class. Here, he was a star, surrounded by admirers exuding charisma. I was shocked. He never once mentioned being so famous. One piece in particular caught my eye, a sculpture of a woman crying bloody tears. The sorrow and fear etched into her face were so vivid I felt compelled to touch it. My fingers brushed against its surface. It was warm. Before I could react, the figure crumbled under my touch. It wasn't stone. Flesh and blood spilled onto the floor, and the smell of decay filled the air. I stumbled back, horror clawing at my throat. Then everything went black. I woke up to darkness, my body stiff and cold. I tried to move, but I couldn't. My limbs refused to obey me. My chest burned and panic set in. I could see faintly the stage of the gallery, the dim lights casting shadows over a new centerpiece. It took me a moment to realize the centerpiece was me. I was frozen in place, my body contorted into a macabre pose. My hands reached out as if pleading, my face twisted in terror. The spectators marveled at my realism, their voices muffled in my ears. Truly haunting, someone said. A tragic masterpiece, another murmured. I wanted to scream, to beg for help, but I couldn't. Ron appeared beside me, smiling faintly. He leaned in close, his voice soft and cold. Welcome to eternity. They called it the Murmuring House. It was an old house, built at the end of Stevens Lane. It wasn't about the way it looked. Plain white stone walls, red brick tiles on the roof, and a beautiful garden full of flowers. It was the sounds. Every passerby talked about the same thing, the murmurs. The voices were extremely low, sometimes no louder than a whisper, but you'd always swear you heard them. Despite seeming to be in perfect condition, the house had been unoccupied for the last 7 years. The landlord had lowered the price 5 times, but nobody wanted it. Everyone had heard the stories. People losing their minds, entire families either dying or disappearing. It was enough to discourage anyone. The Millers were not one of those people. James Miller had just gotten himself a new job, and the family was getting pretty desperate for a home. They did not pay any attention to the stories about the house. The town gave the family a month, because that was how long the victims usually lasted. Week 1. The family shrugged off the rumors. Small town tales, James told his wife Sarah as they unpacked. The son Timmy had greater problems, like fitting into a new school and making new friends. The worries of a spooky haunted house seemed non-existent to the introverted boy. The house was really good for its price. 2 rooms, a study for James, and an amazing lawn. The house already had the essential furniture. The basement was off limits to the family, though. The landlord said something about unstable walls and asked them not to open it. The family happily agreed, not wanting to miss such an unbelievable offer. The house was too good, maybe the best they could find in the town. The murmurs started on the 3rd day. Sarah was the first to notice. At night, she heard a faint voice calling for her. "Honey, do you hear that?" She nudged her husband awake. "Probably just the wind outside. Nothing to worry about, love," said James, half asleep. Sarah thought it made sense, but found it odd. All the windows in the room were closed. "Daddy, were you the one in the garden last night?" Timmy asked the following morning. "No, son, I was asleep. "You must have heard the night guard," answered James as he prepared the breakfast. Timmy decided not to question any further, but he was sure the voice he heard in the garden belonged to his father, and it was calling his name. Week 2. By the second week, everyone had experienced something strange which they couldn't explain. James would often snap out of a trance at his desk, only to find the phrase, "Can you hear us?" scrawled across his screen hundreds of times. He also received calls from unknown numbers, asking him to let us out. Sarah started finding strange dark red spots all over the house. No matter how much she cleaned them, they would come back. While cleaning the basement, she found what appeared to be hundreds of names written on the basement walls. No matter how hard she scrubbed, she was unable in erasing any of them. The basement really was in a terrible state. The cracks and crevices made it look way older than the rest of the house. She did not want Timmy to get hurt while playing here, so she decided to lock the door once again. Timmy began speaking about a man in the basement, whom he called the Ear Man. In his words, Ear Man was tall and covered in ears of all sizes. As his fascination with this Ear Man grew, he started speaking of how the figure whispered to him at night, sharing secrets about the house, and said he loved their voices. Soon, Timmy started whispering by the basement door, even drawing unsettling images of him on his bedroom wall, and spoke of his constant listening. His parents dismissed it as just his imagination, even when they heard voices in the basement one night. Week 3. The family had fallen apart. James had barricaded himself in his study, driven to the brink by the relentless whispers that seemed to seep from every crevice of the house. He thought that isolation might silence the voices, but they followed him, growing louder in his solitude. His Word documents were filled with the same word over and over again. Listen. Notebooks, once filled with ideas and notes, were now consumed by frantic scrawls of the same request. The walls, once painted in a cozy shade of blue, now had the phrase carved and scratched all over them. Sarah kept scrubbing and cleaning the house, even when her hands turned raw and started bleeding, mumbling something about keeping the house happy. The dark red spots were all over the house now, originating from the basement and creeping all over the walls. It seemed like the walls themselves were bleeding. The house even crawled into little Timmy's dreams. Every night he'd have the same dream, all alone, standing at the top of the stairs that led to the basement. He would hear muffled voices behind the door, the voices of Mommy and Daddy. Ear Man would urge him to open the door and talk about how he couldn't wait for him to meet the others. The family stopped talking to each other. They didn't need to. The house whispered everything they wanted to hear. Week 4. When the Millers stopped responding to calls and doorbells, the neighbors grew concerned and alerted the police. Upon entering the house, everything appeared untouched, as if it had been cleaned meticulously. The sharp scent of bleach and disinfectant hung in the air, too strong to ignore. But when the basement door was unlocked, a wave of putrid odor hit them like a tsunami. Inside, the decomposing bodies of James and Sarah lay sprawled on the floor. The authorities couldn't determine the cause of death. Some speculated it was something they weren't willing to share. Timmy, their son, was nowhere to be found. 9 years have passed and still no trace of him. The only thing left to guide the detectives was the hundreds of names, including James, Sarah, and Timmy, scrawled desperately across the basement walls. The case was never solved, just another story lost in the whispers of the house. The town moved on, another family consumed by the house, they all said. But at night, if you ever walked on Stevens Lane passing by the house, you'd swear you heard them, James, Sarah, and Timmy, whispering and murmuring along with the past occupants. If you listen closely, you might hear your name too. I've been reading a lot of stories online about urban myths and serial killers, as I've had an experience with one that fits in both categories. I'm not a storyteller per se, but honestly, this is the only way I can tell my experience to anyone reading. I'm just an ordinary person who works a normal job, and honestly, what I saw haunts me every time I close my eyes. I'm writing this journal as I feel that whatever or whoever I saw that day will finally come to close my chapter. It happened in November. The weather was more like autumn, as winter had not yet started, so the temperature was cold but somehow bearable to me. The night felt crisp, honestly, and I do not have to cover my mouth and could breathe in the cold air. I lived 2 blocks from the bus stop, so I took my time walking, as I enjoyed it. My car was in the shop for its service, which was why I'm walking home. The area I live is a middle-class suburban type of place with single-story houses. My place was my parents' before they passed on. I liked it and saved me a bunch in rent and other costs. The street was empty at this time of night, which suited me. As I walked, I took the time to look at other houses, noting that many still had their lights on, as it was around 9:30. As I walked, I came across a house that was in complete darkness. This was odd, as our area did not have the usual empty houses and such. The occupants' cars were still parked in front of their garage, so one could surmise they were home. The odd thing was that the front door was open, and a window looked broken. The window that was broken was the living room one, so I stopped to get a better look and saw a hand sticking out the front door. It was resting on the floor. I slowly took a few steps toward the house to get a better look and see if I could help. As I got closer to the front porch, I stopped. There was blood oozing out the front door and slowly making its way to the front steps. I took a step back and then slowly another. I did not want to get caught in a situation that could lead me to the same fate, so I began retreating further, and as I was about to turn and run home, I saw it. I refer to her. She looked like she was left out in the sun to dry, as the skin looked white as paper to me, even in the semi-light. I was transfixed by the sight, and slowly a hand was raised by her, and she placed it on the window. The window was the one I supposed to be in the dining area. Placing the open hand on the window, I could see it was covered in a red paint of sort. She began to slowly move it side by side, like as if she was waving to me while leaving streaks of the red paint on the glass. Then I saw the worst thing I could ever imagine. She opened her mouth, and in the light it let off glints of sharp things I could only guess to be razors, like the box cutter type. I lost my composure and ran. My house was 4 minutes away, but it felt like 4 days to me. I ran to the front door and fumbled in my pockets to look for the keys, all the while looking to see if I wasn't followed. Entering my home, I sank to the floor. I tried to steady my breath and remembered that I have a phone and should call the police. I fished out my phone and tried to call a few times. My hands were shaking uncontrollably, but finally I managed to call and waited for them to pick up. The operator picked up and I basically blurted everything out in a couple of seconds, to which the operator tried to calm me down. I took a few breaths as I told and recounted everything to her and gave the address. She let me know that a unit will be sent to check up on the place. While that was happening, she asked if I have locked my door and checked my home also, to which I panicked. As I looked up at my door, I jolted up and locked it. I told her that I lived alone and always lock up. She told me to remain calm and keep the phone close, as she will call again to check up on me. I closed the call and switched on the lights to my home and made my way to the kitchen, where I sat down on the dinner table. The adrenaline was wearing off and I felt like I was drowning in warm water. I think I may have passed out, as when I woke my phone was ringing and so was the front door. I saw it was police calling. I picked up and it was the operator. She asked if I was okay and I told her I had passed out from exhaustion. I got up and walked to the front door. She let me know that this happens when you are involved in such situations and I should take a bath before getting some rest. Looking through the spy hole on my door, I could see there were 2 officers standing outside. I let the operator know this and she let me know that she had asked to check up on me also. I opened the door while keeping the line active. The officers introduced themselves and I nodded. The operator said that I should talk to the officers and will be cutting the call now. I cut the line and put my phone back in my pocket and let the officers in. I led them to the living room and we sat down. One of the officers tried to comfort me by talking about my place. It was a short, banal conversation, but it helped. I then told them my account for the night. They listened without a word, and when I finished, asked for a clear description of the figure I saw, and I tried my best to give them one, but honestly, that description felt off. The face I saw looked like a badly made ghost mask, but honestly, it still is scarier to think of now. They told me to be vigilant as this was the first case in this area, and they fear there could be more, and that since I saw this person, I may be in some danger now. I asked what happened to the family in that house. What they told me brought shivers to my core. Honestly, miss, we don't know. There are no bodies in the house, but there was blood everywhere. It's like the perp tried to repaint the house in their blood. I know we should not be speaking to you about this, but you saw the blood on the front door. Beyond that, we cannot figure out who or what this person is, but whoever they are, we have the FBI looking for them also. So here's where I ask you, is there a place you can go for a while, or at least till we catch this killer? It's for your own safety. I told them that I had no other family or place I could go to, as this was the only home I had. They considered this, and one of them excused himself and walked out the front door to make a call. The one still sitting told me that if I did not have a place to go to, then another option was witness protection, which was brought up by the agents. I knew that once in witness protection, I would basically start again, and by the looks of it, I had no other choice left. It's been 6 months since I was moved to this random town. Given few resources to start my life again, I did my best. At first it was okay and things weren't so bad. I got used to the life. It was then I started to notice things happening at night. There would be noises from outside my apartment, like someone pacing around and tapping on the windows. I called the police a few times, and in most cases it turned out to be nothing, but they swore they felt like someone was watching them. I was becoming paranoid myself. I called the agents assigned to me and asked if I could be moved, and he informed me that it was impossible, as he did not have another place I could be moved to. I asked why the investigation was really taking so long, and he did not have an answer, but said that I was the only tangible witness to this serial killer's crimes. I was confused. Since I checked online, there were no mention of such crimes on the news sites and asked why. He informed me that it was being kept out of the news as there were no bodies, only blood trails, and missing bodies that could easily be recorded as fraudulent death reports. The real problem was that locations of every crime was random and nothing connected them at all. I was getting worried by all this, and now I am getting even more paranoid as there have been scratch marks on my door and windows. I tried to use a camera to catch the prankster, but nothing. There were now knockings in the middle of the night and even whispers of a voice. I'm scared that soon I will be next. Today, I found a bloody razor on my doorstep. It was just laid on the doorstep. Please help.